Happy Monday. I hope this video finds you happy and healthy after a nice 3-day weekend with your friends and family, and that you're gearing up for a nice 4-day work week. On Wednesday, it's our first staff meeting, and so one of the things that I wanted to try this year is to flip a staff meeting. Some of you may or may not have heard about flipping a classroom, but essentially you provide instruction ahead of time, and so students may be watching a video or watching a PowerPoint presentation or doing some reading, and then when they come into the classroom, they have that time to work and do their homework and collaborate with each other. And so my goal for this video is that I'm going to give you a little bit of information about writing student learning objectives, so that on Wednesday when we have our staff meeting, instead of me doing a formal presentation, I'm sure I will say something at the beginning, but essentially during that time you're going to sit with your grade level teams and determine how we're going to approach the student learning objectives. Now, believe me, I know and I understand that student learning objectives are not necessarily a requirement of your evaluation, and none of the things that we do with RISE this year affects your evaluation. And my goal here is just to make sure that we all understand what it is that we're going to be doing, so that next year we can just take off with a running start and that we're not stressed about it or feel like we haven't had any guidance on what we're going to be doing. So this is my way of trying to prepare us. So the first things that you need to know is there's 5 steps in creating the student learning objectives. And with your weekly update in this video, I'm also sending you the student learning objective handbook. Now that handbook is 66 pages long, and I do not expect you to read that cover to cover by any means, particularly before the staff meeting on Wednesday. However, the part that really covers the 5 steps is much, much shorter. And as you read through it, you'll recognize that not everything is going to apply to you because it is written for K through 12. So if you could spend a little bit of time reviewing particularly the first 3 steps in the process, that would be wonderful. Do not feel like you need to print that. I will have handouts available for you, and I will print the handbook for you for our meeting on Wednesday. So with that, let's talk a little bit about SLOs. First of all, the RISE program essentially groups teachers into 3 different categories. Group 1 teachers teach half or more of their classes have growth model data. So for example, if you were a 7th grade teacher and you teach math, then you would be considered a Group 1 teacher because you get growth model data for all of your classes. Okay, I don't believe we have anybody in our building that would be in Group 1. Group 2 teachers are teachers that have less than half of the courses that they teach have growth model data. So our 4, 5, and 6 teachers at Otterburn have less than half of their classes are growth model data, but they do have growth model data. So you guys are Group 2. Now, Group 2 teachers have things split out a little bit differently. Your SLOs don't count quite as much because you do have a growth model piece in there. So I believe that your SLOs only count for 10 to 15% of your final evaluation. So it's a little bit smaller of a piece because it does go straight growth model data. So when you're setting your objectives, you have to choose something that is not covered with growth model. So 4th through 6th grade teachers may use science, they may use social studies, and you can use the I-STEP assessment as your final assessment of the school year to determine how many students achieved mastery. So if you have, you should all have your students' I-STEP scores from last year. That would be something really good for you to bring to the meeting. If you did any pre-testing, for example, in science or social studies, anything like that, or if you have any ideas for a pre-test, post-test model, you're going to want to bring those to the meeting. And again, this is just going to be a process that we're going to have to work through and figure out what assessments we're going to use to get that starting point. So if it's social studies and there's a lot of reading involved in that, you may use their reading I-STEP scores from the year before to determine where they fall. That's something that we'll have to collaborate and talk about at our meeting on Wednesday. The last group of teachers, group 3 teachers, they don't have any growth model data. So kindergarten through 3rd grade teachers would be in that group 3 with no growth model data. And so your SLO piece that you write is going to count for a larger chunk of the evaluation. So we need to determine what assessments we're going to use to show student growth. So if you have STAR reading data or STAR early literacy data, you're going to bring that to the meeting because we need to look at how students fall as basically high, medium, or low. Okay, so if they are high students, then we can put them in a category, and at the end of the year, where do we want them to be? How many kids are going to show mastery along the rubric for scoring growth? And we'll get to that. Don't worry, it sounds confusing, but it's not that bad. And once you look at the handbook, there's some tables that can kind of give you a better idea of what that's going to look like. So group 3 teachers are K-3 teachers. 3rd grade teachers do have I-STEP scores that can be used, except you do need to figure out how to do a starting point. So that's why the STAR information is really helpful, and I believe everybody has already given that. So that's a good way to go. So the 3 steps that we're going to be focusing on, the first one is choosing the assessment, and we need to come up with what assessments we're going to use for students to show that growth. So that's why the STAR testing is really important. And if you think you might want to use math as your SLO, which is your choice, then we need to talk about if you need to give your kids the STAR math assessment. All of these details we can work out as we go, but determining the assessments we're going to use and how we're going to assess kids is really an important part of what we're doing. Once we've chosen the assessments, then we have to look at student starting points. So where do those students fall as far as knowledge of curriculum? If they're students that are coming to you behind, if they're on target, if they're high and above average, we need to figure out how many students you have in each one of those categories. And that's going to make up your class student learning objective. So your class looks at your whole piece. Now, if you're somebody who has more than one class, for this purpose, you are only going to choose one class. Okay, so perhaps Mrs. Holder is going to choose the 3rd grade class, and maybe she's going to choose reading. Okay, those things are acceptable, but you're only going to focus on one class. So Mrs. Heigl, she's going to pick one class to focus on. She doesn't have to be evaluated on every single child that comes into her classroom, so it's one class. Same thing with teachers that switch classes. You're probably going to want to go with your home class as your class 4 student learning objectives. And then the final thing that we do is we set our student learning objectives. So we look at all of the pieces, how many high, medium, and low kids, how we're going to assess it. And then there's a rubric where we determine what those kids are going to have to do to be highly effective. We're going to have to determine how many kids are going to make growth, appropriate growth, and master the content area for you to be considered highly effective, needs improvement. My gosh, I can't remember what the last one is, or the lowest category. So we need to figure out how many are going to go into each one of those. So my goal for Wednesday's meeting, and I know this can be a little bit overwhelming, but my goal for Wednesday's meeting is that we'll determine what assessments we're going to use at each grade level. If you've already given some of those assessments, that you can bring the data and we can start looking at how your students, what their starting points are for your SLO, and possibly start writing our SLOs. You're also going to bring your calendar because we will set our release time for each grade level at that meeting. So I'll bring the master calendar and we'll determine when you're going to work. And during your release time, You'll have the opportunity, obviously, to plan curriculum and look at the Common Core and the PARC assessments, but you will also have time to work with me and talk more specifically about your grade level or individual needs for SLOs. So don't forget, review that handbook ahead of time. Only about the first 20 pages, and it's pretty easy to scan through it. Review that before Wednesday, and I look forward to working with you, and we'll just keep on keeping on, and I know that we can do this together. So have a great rest of your Labor Day, and I'll see you tomorrow.